On July 13, 2024, former president and the Republican Party's nominee for the 2024 election, Donald Trump, was speaking to his audience at a campaign rally near Butler, Pennsylvania. Nothing was unusual about this except what came next. Multiple bullets fired at him from 20-year-old Thomas Matthew Crooks. While the Trump campaign said Trump is fine, the incident sent major shockwaves through the political world. Now, this isn't a video about the attempted killing of Trump. Rather, it's a video about what would have happened if the shooter actually succeeded. More than that though, it's about the entire process itself. See, this pertains to candidates like Biden too. For those of you who watched the first presidential debate between Trump and Biden, it was objectively clear that Biden wasn't really sharp at all, to say the least. I mean, he's certainly not possessing the mental strength needed to be the leader of the most powerful country on earth. And this isn't a slight on Biden either. Getting older affects everyone cognitively. But nevertheless, what happens if a presidential nominee simply isn't fit to actually be president? And I'm not talking about different political views, but quite literally not fit enough to be president, which is certainly a problem with very old candidates. Imagine after all this campaigning for a nominee and right before the elections, they're gone due to a shooting, mental decline, disease, or whatever it may be. Boom. Now what? Well, the answer to this question actually lies in what part of the election cycle this happens in. Let's start from the beginning. If the main candidate of either the Republican Party or Democratic Party was incapacitated before the primaries, there'd be plenty of people in both parties able to jump into the nomination race. The only real issue is with other candidates filing before the deadlines to get on the primary ballot, as 22 states have deadlines before the new year. This can be remedied pretty quickly though, as state election officials may adjust filing deadlines to be able to get new entries onto the ballot in time for some of the spring primaries. Regardless though, there'd still be other people who've gotten on the ballot to challenge to be their party's nomination. Now, let's say a death happened after the primaries, but before the night of the nominating convention. This is where things start to get interesting. The convention would become what they used to be before reforms made the primaries the dominant event for voting, minus the smoke-filled rooms. Essentially, delegates would arrive for the convention largely uncommitted to any candidate, and so begins the taxing process of deciding who their nominee should be. Presidential hopefuls would go from state delegation to state delegation trying to make their case as for why they should be president. Similar to how Senator John Kennedy and Senator Lyndon B. Johnson did as recently as the 1960 convention in LA. It'd be a messy floor fight. Imagine frantic bargaining, backroom dealing, and public speech making. But now, let's make this even more interesting. Say it was all said and done, a candidate was officially voted on and confirmed. What happens if he or she then ends up incapacitated? Well, this is where things get a bit murky. There's been only one recorded instance of when something like this has happened, when in the 1972 Democratic Convention, revelations came out that George McGovern's running mate, Senator Tom Eagleton, had been treated for mental illness. These were of course different times, and Eagleton had to resign from the ticket. What happened next was McGovern had to choose his replacement, which ended up being Sergeant Shriver. But the thing is, he alone wasn't able to simply place Shriver on the ticket with him. It needed to be ratified by the full Democratic National Committee, or DNC for short. So on August 9, 1972, the DNC chair Gene Westwood called the National Committee into session to officially nominate Shriver as McGovern's running mate. Now, while this sounds pretty simple, it actually isn't. And this was for the vice presidency too, not the presidency. In reality, both the Democrat and Republican Party have different protocols of going about it. While you can imagine the end result would probably be that the vice president would be stepped up to the presidential nomination, that's not necessarily guaranteed. If party leaders decide that the former VP nominee, who may have just been a ticket balancing choice, should not top the new ticket, things can get really tricky. For the Democratic Party, the DNC chair is required to, and I quote, confer with the Democratic leadership of the United States Congress and the Democratic Governors Association, and shall report to the Democratic National Committee, which is authorized to fill the vacancy or vacancies. This is literally spelled out in the charter of the Democrat Party. Meanwhile, for the Republican Party, if a vacancy occurs on the Republican side, the Republican National Committee, or RNC for short, can either reconvene the National Convention or select a new candidate itself, under Rule 9 of Party Rules, titled Filling Vacancies in Nominations, though the new nominee must receive a majority vote to officially become the party candidate. Theoretically speaking too, Congress technically has the power to pass a special statute and push back election day, giving the dead candidate's party time to regroup. But it's something that's literally never been done before. The date of the election is set by federal law, being the Tuesday after the first Monday in November, which would be the 5th of November in the 2024 election. It's possible, but highly unlikely. Both chambers of Congress would have to approve this measure, and the president would have to sign it too, something that would probably never happen in a government as divided as it is today. And even if it were to happen, Congress could only delay the election by a matter of weeks, because the Constitution states that a president's term shall end at noon on the 20th day of January. That can't be changed. The authority of the national parties to choose their nominee in the event their first choice can't run comes as a surprise to many. And yet, it's a reminder that the choice of a nominee is party business, not state law, not federal law, and not even constitutional law. It's no surprise, though, that when it gets to this situation, the results usually end up disastrous. An example we'd have of this is again with the Democratic Party, when, in 1968, President Lyndon B. Johnson decided not to run after an embarrassing finish in New Hampshire's primary against Eugene McCarthy. Johnson won, but just barely. When he dropped out of the presidential race, it set off a chaotic competition to replace him, in which Senator Robert F. Kennedy joined the battle, as well as Lyndon's vice president, Hubert Humphrey. We all know what ended up happening to Robert Kennedy later that year, and the convention was so disastrous for the losing party that it led to an overhaul of the entire primary system, resulting in the contest-driven nominating process in place today. Now, what about if the candidate died after the election day, but before Congress counts the votes? No winning candidate has died in this period before, but crazily enough, this has happened before with a losing candidate. In 1872, Democratic presidential candidate Horace Greeley died after losing the election to Ulysses S. Grant, but before the casting of the Electoral College votes. Although his death didn't affect the outcome, there was a debate over what to do with the 66 Electoral College votes he had won. Most electors chose to cast their votes for another candidate, and Congress chose not to count the 3 votes cast for the deceased Greeley. We can't necessarily take this as precedent though, because it occurred before the 20th Amendment was ratified, more importantly Section 3 of it, stating, "If at the time fixed for the beginning of the term of the President-elect shall have died, the Vice President-elect shall become President." But the question of what would have happened if the votes would have affected the outcome remains. Though if the winning candidate with the most electoral votes was to die between after the election day and before the meeting of the Electoral College, then again, a new candidate can be picked this late. Let me explain. Many people don't realize this, but when they cast a vote, they aren't voting for an actual candidate, but for electors who pledge to vote for their preferred party in the Electoral College, if that makes sense. These electors are actual people who meet in their state capitals and sign election documents that are forwarded onto the President of the Senate, aka the Vice President, solely for the purposes of counting them to certify the election. Because of this, electors in most states could simply vote for the replacement nominee given to them by their party's committee, regardless of which name is actually on the ballot. This nominee would be decided based on the same things we talked about before. But as of 2020, 33 states and the District of Columbia have laws that require electors to vote for the candidates for whom they pledged to vote, else they'd be, quote, faithless electors. So if they're voting for a replacement nominee, that means they're breaking the law as soon as that person couldn't have won the vote. Although in half these states, there's no enforcement mechanisms to be faithful, it's likely that the legislature would quickly meet to amend the law so that their votes would count and not be voided. Now, if a candidate died after the meetings of the Electoral College but before Congress's counting of electoral votes, Congress would presumably declare the deceased president-elect to be the winner, and then the vice president-elect would succeed to the presidency. We've sort of seen this play out before, albeit on a much smaller scale. If we look at, yet again, another Democratic candidate example, but this time for a Senate seat in Missouri in 2000, the state's governor and Senate candidate, Mel Carnahan, died just 20 days before the election. The state's lieutenant governor, a Democrat who ascended to the governorship, committed to appointing Carnahan's wife, Jean, to the seat if he won posthumously, which he did. Yep, that's right, the dead man won the election. She was then appointed to fill her late husband's seat, but under Missouri law, she would only serve until a special election could be held in 2002. It's also possible that for the big seat, Congress would discard these votes, and if no candidate then received a majority of votes, it would cast its own votes according to the 12th Amendment of the Constitution. where the House of Representatives, voting by states, chooses the president while the Senate chooses the vice president. This is known as a contingent election. Ultimately, it's in this stage here where there's potential for the most confusion, as we don't really know what could happen in this situation. And if the unexpected occurs, parties will jockey for political advantage and bad actors would probably try to seize on the chaos. The good news is that this would be an incredibly rare thing to happen, so I wouldn't worry about it. Anyways, once the votes are certified, then it's all smooth sailing. If the president-elect dies between Congress's counting of electoral votes and Inauguration Day, the 12th Amendment is clear: the vice president-elect shall become president. In the end, unfortunately, the possibility of a presidential candidate being killed isn't new to campaigns. It almost happened to former President Teddy Roosevelt during a campaign speech in Milwaukee in 1912. And it did happen to Robert Kennedy. As politics continue to get more and more divisive, this question of the process may become more and more relevant. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.